May 4, 2020. J.Crew filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Mike Schwartz, the specialist who saved Ralph Lauren, was hired to stop the bleeding, but the company had already moved its $250 million trademark out of reach. He wasn't just fighting a retail slump, he was fighting a trapdoor. By the end of this, you'll see how a single legal loophole turned a fashion icon into a ghost. Two men founded a wholesale catalog business in 1947. Yes, really, the inventory was simple, the margins were thin, but the ambition was loud. They called it popular merchandise. The first catalog hit mailboxes in January of 1983. It was a modest start for what would become a cultural phenomenon. The brand name changed to J.Crew that same year. Mitchell Chinader later recalled that sales grew at 25 to 30% annually. From $3 million in revenue, the company exploded past $100 million. This, it turns out, is how you build a catalog empire. The pivot to physical retail happened in 1989. A single store opened at Manhattan's South Street Seaport. It was a quiet experiment in brick and mortar that would eventually define the company's identity for decades. Miller Drexler arrived as CEO in 2003. He was a retail veteran who had previously transformed Gap and Banana Republic. He brought a specific aesthetic obsession that would soon become the company's greatest asset. Under Drexler, J.Crew became the uniform of the creative class. Jenna Lyons styled lookbooks that felt like personal letters from a tasteful friend. The brand equity peaked, creating a cult following that transcended typical retail metrics. Private equity firms TPG and Leonard Green bought the company in 2011. The deal was valued at $3 billion. They took it private, loading the balance sheet with debt in a move that would haunt them later. The $3 billion price tag carried a $1.6 billion debt spike. The balance sheet immediately reflected the new reality. By 2016, the company moved 72% of its core intellectual property into an unrestricted subsidiary. It was a defensive maneuver executed with surgical precision. The trademarks were relocated to J.Crew Cayman, a foreign restricted subsidiary structured specifically as a non-loan party. The map animation shows the assets leaving New York for the Caribbean. The transfer relied on a specific loophole in Section 7.02, subsection T of the term loan agreement. We can see the smoking gun in the actual bankruptcy filing, where the language shifts from standard protection to a roadmap for asset stripping. The financing agreement governed the company's debt, but never defined the term proceeds. The word appears over 100 times in the contract, yet remains legally undefined. The company treated its intellectual property as the proceeds of its initial investment. This interpretation allowed them to move $347 million in assets beyond the reach of secured creditors. This strategy became known as the J.Crew moniker. It was a rational business move that ultimately poisoned the well for any future acquisition or rescue attempt. The shelves told a story of confusion. Women's fashion, once the brand's anchor, had slumped in June 2015. The company failed to react to cheap fast fashion and athleisure items. Mickey Drexler noted the error plainly. He said J.Crew raised prices and underwent expansion during years when consumers became more and more thrifty. It was a pricing error that confused the very customers they relied on. Jenna Lyons and Mickey Drexler departed J.Crew in 2017. The creative vision left with them. The leadership vacuum was immediate, expensive, and impossible to fill with internal talent. The litigation arrived in December 2016. J.Crew faced lawsuits after moving its intellectual property out of the reach of lenders. The strategy was clever. It was also catastrophic. The financial reality of 2019 was stark. Revenue stood at $2.54 billion, but total equity was negative $1.35 billion. The net loss for that year was $78.8 million. The company faced significant cash burn while attempting to revitalize its brand identity. On May 4, 2020, J.Crew announced it would apply for bankruptcy protection amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. The stores closed, the foot traffic vanished, the trapdoor held firm. Amidst mounting financial pressures, in 2016, J.Crew transferred its trademark. This made acquisition impossible. No buyer wanted the liability structure. The J.Crew maneuver had poisoned the well for any future rescue attempt, leaving the company isolated and insolvent. Mike Schwartz attempted to fix it. As the private equity turnaround specialist, he tried to salvage the brand from within. Critics argue he focused on the logo while the structural rot remained unaddressed. The legal team leaned on Section 7.2 of the term loan agreement. It was a specific provision designed for asset transfers, not for stripping value from secured creditors. This is in the actual filing. The financing agreement never defined the word proceeds, despite it appearing over 100 times. It treated intellectual property as the proceeds of initial investment, allowing assets to move outside the secured group. On May 4, 2020, J.Crew reached an agreement with lenders holding 71% of its term loan. They agreed to restructure the debt rather than let the company collapse immediately. Under the transaction support agreement, lenders converted approximately $1.65 billion of debt into equity. The balance sheet was wiped clean of the burden that had poisoned acquisitions for years. Jan Singer, the CEO, stated that court approval of first-day motions was an important step in the company's financial restructuring. The trapdoor had closed, but the company finally survived the fall. On May 4, 2020, J.Crew Group filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The filing date is etched into the public record, a specific Tuesday that marked the end of Mike Schwartz's attempt to salvage the brand. Visual, Chapter 11, filing date, May 4, 2020. The exit strategy was simple math. The company shed $1.6 billion in debt by converting it into equity, wiping the balance sheet clean of the burden that had poisoned acquisitions for years. It was a necessary amputation. Visual, debt pile shrinking animation. New leadership arrived in the form of Libby Waddle, appointed CEO in late 2020. She took over a company that had survived its own collapse, stepping into a role defined by restructuring rather than growth. Visual, Libby Waddle portrait. The new owners were Anchorage Capital Group and Leonard Green & Partners. They inherited a retail giant that was no longer a retailer, but a balance sheet waiting to be reassembled by private equity specialists. Estabilzik. Alleged Capital logo. The court granted access to a debtor-in-possession financing facility of $400 million. This lifeline came from lenders Anchorage, GSO Capital Partners, and Davidson Kempner, providing the cash needed to keep the lights on during the pivot. Azavli, cash flow graphic. On May 5th, the U.S. cash flow graphic. On May 5th, the U.S. quote. Bankruptcy Court for the Eastern District of Virginia granted interim approval for all first-day motions. Jan Singer, the CEO, noted this was an important step in the financial restructuring, marking the legal victory. Visual, court gavel strike. The employee cost was immediate and severe. J.Crew Group had 400 employees in 2019, but the restructuring required closing stores and shedding staff to survive. The human capital was liquidated to save the corporate entity. Store closure notices. Schwartz exit concluded the failed turnaround. His attempt to fix brand dilution with a rebrand struggled to address the structural rot of the trapdoor. The company survived, but the architect of its recent decline had already left the building. The strategy used by J.Crew to transfer assets was known as the trapdoor, or J.Crew maneuver. It is now a cautionary tale in corporate law textbooks. In 2024, J.Crew Group reported revenues of $2.7 billion. The brand survives, but it has changed. The structural rot remains in legal history. The 2016 IP transfer document shows exactly how the value was moved. The impact on creditors was total. They looked at an empty balance sheet and found nothing but drafting gaps. The headquarters is still at 225 Liberty Street in New York City. The address remains, but the people are gone. Mike Schwartz is gone. The brand survives. But as the New York skyline fades to black, one thing remains: the trapdoor is closed.